So I have to say that it's been a privilege working with Ed over the past 6 years. He's done an absolutely brilliant job in this position. So let's talk about burnout, and I have nothing to disclose. The lecture outline is, as you see here, we're going to talk about the components of burnout, what the consequences of burnout are, some risk factors, statistics, prevention strategies, treatment, and a little bit about resilience. So what are the components of burnout? Well, the most important component is emotional exhaustion. Also, there's two more things in the triad: feelings of decreased accomplishment and an emotionally detached attitude. So what are some adverse consequences of burnout? Well, all the things below on this slide get worse with burnout. Professionalism, clinical and academic performance, patient safety, relationships, personnel retention, and patient satisfaction all get worse as a result of burnout. It may also lead to absenteeism. It may lead to substance abuse, disruptive behavior, and early retirement. Some of the risk factors for burnout include job dissatisfaction. And what are some things that lead to that? Well, work overload, long hours, difficult shifts, more night call, unfair behavior by those around you, lack of control, and time constraints, that is, being forced to do too many studies being read or performed in too short a period of time, such as on the ER or priorities or stats. Too many changes, and that may be a little less emphasized. What do I mean by that? It may mean changes in protocols, changes in the amount of type of equipment, changes in PACS, voice recognition, computer systems, perhaps as one goes from place to place, or I know a lot of people getting new computer systems in their hospitals. There are too many changes, too many different ways of doing things, too many different shift changes, and so on. That is a stress factor. Poor intellectual stimulation, that is, being bored with routine studies, is too much the same thing. Poor relationships, both at work and at home. Inadequate skills in radiology to do the job. Declining income. So what are some other risk factors? Well, isolation is a risk factor. We're going to talk more about that later. Making a medical error is a risk factor. Perhaps you've been in a suit before. Perhaps you're worried about a suit in the future. It doesn't matter whether you had a judgment against you or not. You may be quite nervous about making an error. That's a stress factor. And poor training, not only in radiology, but in management skills and in communication, can all be a risk factor. Interestingly, being at the halfway point in a career is a risk factor. An advertisement for marriage is that being single is a risk factor for burnout. On the other hand, a spouse who is also a doctor is a risk factor for burnout. There's sort of a sad quote here on the left of your screen, that physician couples mainly live for the future because both of them think that someday in the future things are going to get better, but it may not happen too soon. So poor lifestyle balance is another problem. Conflict between home and work. Not taking care of one's physical and emotional needs is another one. Personality traits. Well, if someone is perfectionistic or indecisive, very self-critical or inflexible, those are risk factors. Interestingly, being idealistic is a risk factor. That is, those people have a constant stress between, or tension between, the reality and what they would like to have as perfection. Similarly, people that are very empathetic may have a substantial energy drain from their interaction with patients and others. So some other stressors are lack of institutional support and resources to do the job. Stress by compassion, especially in radiation oncology, where one may be dealing with very ill or terminal patients, and insufficient time to grieve the passing of a patient. So here's some statistics on burnout. They're very troubling. In 2003, an article said that 93% of radiologists enjoyed their field. By 2010, the burnout rate among diagnostic radiologists was 48%, 46% for all physicians. Interestingly, 38% for radiation oncology. And it's generally lower for radiation oncology than for diagnostic radiology. I think part of that is due to the patient contact, interestingly. You're not isolated anymore. even though that you're dealing with all these sick individuals. In 2014, there was an article on who was greatly happy working. Interestingly, lowest was the ED and family docs, and next lowest, almost barely a difference at all, 37% were radiologists and internists. By 2013, we were the 18th highest of all physicians from burnout, and by 2015, the 7th highest of all physicians. In 2015, the burnout rate overall was 49%. Most burnout occurred at ages 46 to 55, and least for those over 66. 54% of the women had burnout, 47% of the men. And I think, by the way, the reason it's least for those over 66 is that if they were going to be subject to burnout, they would have quit long ago. So anyway, 2017, the burnout rate still was 49% overall. The severity was 4.2 out of an average from 1 to 7. So we have seen over time a substantial increase in the burnout rate. And this is across medicine, really. But radiologists have been one of the ones that have gone quite a bit higher. So let's talk about preventing and treating burnout. Decreased prolonged stress is certainly important. Doctors always in a high-stress environment have 15 times the likelihood of developing burnout. Good staffing and scheduling are very helpful in preventing burnout. Having a reasonable pace of work, having fairness in the workplace, a good, friendly atmosphere, good orientation, whether it's a new job, a new hospital, a new way of doing things, a new protocol, whatever. Mentoring can be helpful. Less call, of course, is also helpful. And there are many institutions that are paying people in one way or another, often with more vacation time, to take some of the night call and weekend call, evening call. Restoring control is very important. You want to empower people as much as possible, have career development for them, delegate tasks to them, have them able to take committee assignments which allow them to have more responsibility and so on. And it's important that the administrators or the radiologists that are in power in the group ask for and value feedback and to correct as many problems as is possible. One major university hospital, they asked people what they wanted, and just making small changes in the break room and providing snacks was surprisingly helpful. You want to incentivize, in my opinion, not only RVUs, but excellence in clinical radiology and in other aspects such as administrative tasks, teaching, research, and so a balanced scorecard is a helpful way to do this. You want to recognize people's accomplishments. You can mention it in private, you can mention it in public, you can mention it at a party, you can give a person a plaque or a certificate. Many ways to do that, a bigger office, more access to a secretary, whatever. Recognize accomplishments. Show respect for everyone. Be compassionate to other individuals. Have better communication. Remember to say thank you, by the way, and have transparency as much as possible within the organization. You want to restore balance. That means not only physical and emotional balance, by the way, but spiritual health. And I don't necessarily confine that to God, but rather also to other things like beauty, truth, harmony, whatever is greater than yourself. To have relationships not only with others and your network of supporters, but with yourself. Don't be overly critical of yourself. We all fail at times and we have to pick ourselves up. You want to balance work versus time off. You want to have priorities which include some joyful pursuits. And unfortunately, the greatest obstacle to having fun and having balance in your life is the desire to have a high income. And I know that's easy for me to say because but the average person coming out of medical school is something like $188,000 in debt. It's extraordinary. And many people then make the mistake after residency of buying their palatial home, putting them further in debt, and now they're really under the 8 ball and are under tremendous pressure to earn an income. You want to make things as efficient as possible in the workplace. Scribes may be helpful, especially in interventional radiology. Employ PAs and nurse practitioners. My daughter, by the way, just got her doctorate degree as a nurse and also as a nurse practitioner. You want to have less room turnaround time. You want to have consider less administrative tasks, and that's sort of counterproductive to 3.0. And so one thinks about that carefully. One, on the one hand, wants to have very good relationships with other clinicians, with hospitals, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, administrative tasks, one needs to be very careful that one isn't having too many meetings and too many committees. Help with calls, we have a support system which fields all phone calls before they come in, and with a variety of other things so that the radiologists don't always have to deal with them. Having one PAC system, one computer system, and so on and so forth is very helpful. Having one protocol set for all the hospitals and so on, all this is helpful. To have reasonable financial goals, both individual and group. One wants to have an adequate number of physicians, and one wants to promote quality. And I really think everybody needs to consider the non-financial cost to oneself and one's family. All this pressure for money. I mean, it doesn't help anything if you have to retire early because you're burnt out, for example. It doesn't hurt anything if you have so much pressure that you have to get a divorce, which would be one of the worst financial and emotional decisions that many people have. One wants to have good individual financial planning as well. So let's talk about isolation. I, for example, read in a room that is a private room, like everyone else in my group, which is very efficient in a lot of ways. You grind out a lot of cases, but you're very isolated. You're isolated from technologists, patients, and your colleagues. And that has some ramifications as well. So consider the possibility of some big reading rooms. Consider having reading rooms in the emergency department, clinics, and large offices. Consider having virtual rounds or online meetings. Consider having greater patient contact as well, according to Radiology 3.0. Also consider socialization and communication with clinicians within and outside your group. I sort of hate it when we refer to ourselves as non-clinicians because I think we are clinical as well. Have lunch sessions to educate clinicians, and always try to do things with respect to other people and with teamwork. Another thing that a number of groups have done is to bring in an organizational psychologist to recommend changes in the practice. This could be leadership style, objectives of the group, the governance of the group, comments about radiologists and how they interact with one another, comments regarding how the group interacts with clinicians and the institution and patients. So that might be something to think about if you think your group is getting rather dysfunctional. A clinical psychologist can obviously help with individual problems or problems between two people. Training programs can include skills for the job itself, for coping with stress, and for greater communication. One does want to have support from one's peers and managers if one starts becoming burnt out. And there's also the need for action by the radiology community. This is part of that, in fact, to promote awareness of the problem and solutions. And the Human Resources Commission had this recent article in JACR on burnout, and I see in many meetings now this topic being discussed. So courses and articles are very helpful. You can also monitor the burnout health, shall we say, of your group with taking this Zero Burnout Program survey called the Mini-C for short, which you can get, by the way, online free. Very quick to take it out. Now, resilience is a topic in of itself. I'll make a few comments about it. So resilient individuals, according to this quote, not only bounce back rapidly after challenges, but also grow stronger in the process. But I like this quote even better because resiliency, it says, can be learned. The real path to resiliency lies in minimizing energy drains and maximizing the things that replenish us. In other words, if you consider yourself, let's say, to have a certain amount of energy, you know there are certain things that are going to make you happy in your life, and there's certain things that are going to drain. If you have too much of a drain, too much of an output of energy, over time, that could lead to burnout. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it. So characteristics that help resilience. I read an interesting little article that said that having moral choices is going to restore some control. Even if things don't work out well, if you've made the right moral choice, let's say not to read articles, not to read studies too quickly, or not to do studies that you shouldn't do, or whatever, that is going to restore some control, because even if there are some bad consequences, at least you know you took the high road. Doing things with motives of kindness, love, service to others, and honesty is going to give you more peace, joy, energy, and satisfaction in your life. And to have positive choices in your life for creativity, enthusiasm, challenges, curiosity, and by the way, desire for excellence, not perfection. Perfection is left for a higher being, shall we say. We, as humans, need to go for excellence. So one also wants to have great supportive relationships with patients, family, and friends, and know that what you are doing is important. I mean, every day, at the end of the day, review what you've done. You've read a lot of studies that have helped patients and clinicians. You maybe said some kind words to your colleagues, to perhaps a patient, to maybe a secretary or a program coordinator or whatever, maybe a resident. You've done some things that day that were important, and you've done some things important perhaps in your family and so on. And by the way, one of the recommendations that I've heard for many years now is before you go to sleep every night, think about some things that are good in your life. Just think about several of those things. It's supposed to be better than medication in combating depression. I've heard that from several sources. One needs to have good boundaries regarding work, for relaxation and sleep, for relationships, for exercise, sports, hobbies, art, theater. By the way, Ed has a secret passion for painting, abstract painting, and he's going to be pursuing more of that now. So I'll be happy to see those one of these days. Spirituality is another thing we want to look at. And we want to try to practice optimism. We want to forgive others, and we want to forgive ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we're often in the medical field too hard on ourselves. We need to be able to delegate things to other people. We need to be able to use a team. We need to have good time management, prioritization, and also practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is another subject in of itself. Basically, it means to try to stay in the moment. That is, we all tend to dwell on things that maybe were not so great in our past, maybe mistakes we made, things we may be guilty about, or worry about the future, and we can't enjoy the present. Meditation is one thing to think about regarding that. And by the way, to meditate, you don't necessarily have to be sitting cross-legged on the floor and humming. One can be walking, one can be doing certain exercise, and so on. And so trying to stay in the moment a little bit can be helpful, and to try to enjoy the things around you, whether it's a sunset or anything else. Just try to enjoy life a little bit. So some dimensions of resilience would include physical, emotional, and mental, and there are many different aspects of each. And with that, I'll just thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful meeting and a good trip back.
Thank you very much, Jay. For the format, what we're planning to do is to take group questions all the way at the end. I'm sure we're going to have a few minutes, and we're interested in people's comments and presentations. Jay, that was an excellent presentation. I want to remind everyone, if they haven't already gotten a copy, there is a special collection of the JACR articles relating to human resources. Jay's article about burnout is included in that collection, and there are copies in the back of the room. If you haven't picked up a copy, certainly there will be one for you. So we hope you enjoy this collection. They've all been published, but it's an easier thing just to keep on your bookshelf if you need to pull them out. The second speaker today is another excellent speaker. And by the way, I now have to make an announcement, a conflict of interest. I will be selling my oil paintings, so. But seriously, the second speaker is another long-term member and active member of the Human Resources Commission. Jay Parikh is a transplant to Texas. He started, when I got to know him initially, at the University of Washington. He's a breast imager and has excelled in that area. He's now moved to Texas and is professor of radiology at MD Anderson, and certainly of high quality and standards. He's served in numerous capacities in work, and he's going to be talking about the issue of career alternatives beyond the clinical practice of radiology. Now, just for those of you who may not have been aware, when I spoke today at the council, in case it was someplace else, we started this area, particularly the area of career alternatives, when the workforce number of jobs was really down low. And when people were looking for jobs and having troubles, and Jay came up with the idea is, well, maybe there are other things that people could do. Right now, for this year, again, there are going to be around 2,100, 2,200 available jobs for people who want to change or want to find an initial new job. It's the best it's been since 2013. It's a 14.1% increase over 2016. So there are career alternatives, and Jay is going to talk about that for those people who are so burned out that they can't rejuvenate and need to move on to something else.
So thank you, Ed, for that kind introduction. I wanted to reach out and thank the program committee and the board for supporting this concept of being involved in the program this year by the attendance. Obviously, these issues are near and dear to all of us. Before I begin, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Ed for his extraordinary leadership over the last 6 years. Basically gave the Human Resources Commission CPR, revived it, allowed us to become more innovative and thought-provoking in terms of dealing with HR issues that affect our specialty. So we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude as a specialty to Ed, I think. I don't have any financial disclosures to reveal. I guess I wish I had some. Why do people change and what happens? Well, historically, you know, when people were actually looking for careers beyond clinical practice, it was either there was retirement or there was something wrong with the individual. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. We had received numerous sources that were communicating to the college and specifically to the commission that multiple other factors were affecting several radiologists. Some were frankly bored with their career and ready to move on to something else. Many were dissatisfied with their jobs. Burnout, as we just heard elegantly described by Dr. Harrells. Sometimes physicians experience injuries like any other human beings, some that would leave them in a position where they wouldn't be able to continue their careers, clinically at least. Impairment affected several of our radiologists we heard about, and there's an article that's written by Dr. Bender, lead author, written by the commission. And sometimes, unfortunately, physicians experience multiple lawsuits to the point that they lose licensure in states. And when that happens, what do you do? Is your life over? And also, let's face it, firing and restructuring does happen in radiology groups. Dr. Harrell's written an article on that. It's a landmark article on that same subject. A little bit about the commission and how we work. When we hear issues like this about radiologists being devastated, their careers being affected, and the family stresses they incur, what happens is twice a year we sit down as a commission and actually sit down and discuss ideas and topics that are worth pursuing on behalf of our specialty. We are relentless, absolutely relentless in trying to pursue radiologist wellness. And 3 years ago, when there were massive transitions affecting many radiologists, we wrote our first article on career transitions that was affected predominantly mid-career. But then we started to realize that also end of career there were transitions occurring. And so another article thought process was required. Some of the initial thoughts that we expressed in our mid-career transition paper still apply. So always try and be appraised of your finances. Several talks at this meeting about that. It doesn't matter what stage of your career you're at. We highly recommend always updating your CV and resume. And those are not necessarily the same. CVs are often used, for example, for positions in academics. Resumes are used for administrative type roles, as we talk about, so try and keep a bipartite profile available. Interview training at all times is important. One of the things we hear about is several of the seasoned radiologists, when they go back and re-enter the interview process, have trouble coping with the new interview styles. Having an online profile, and most importantly, probably out of all this, is maintaining a network. I can tell you I've had 3 career transitions in my career, and none of the jobs I actually ever had were formally posted, but I heard about them from word of mouth. Dr. McGeady this morning said the same thing, except for her first very position. She had all her positions as well were through word of mouth and through her network. So expand your network, keep your network going. Don't ever assume that you can never have enough of a big network. And this particular meeting in this organization is a great way to develop that network no matter where you are in your career. When you look at this turbulent time in your life, one wants to sit back from the 50-foot point of view. And one of the things that needs to be looked at is, do you want a career that's still involving medicine? Or do you want to leave medicine altogether? Or potentially, do you want to bridge and decide which is the right way for you? Now, in terms of careers that are available based on medicine, I listed here, and we talk about them all in our article. And we'll look at the first four because these are the four most people go into. Research opportunities do exist, especially in academics. It's hard in this day and age to find funding and grant work to be able to subsidize yourself entirely on a salary with research, but certainly in industry that is sometimes possible. And operational consulting work is being used more and more by hospitals and organizations, but usually more at a system level as opposed to individual facilities. If you're interested in pursuing management or administration at that stage of your career, there are certain roles that are available. Medical directors of networks, radiology networks, of individual centers, serving as chief medical officers, chief quality officers, chief executive officers, as we heard about this year at RSNA, are all positions that are available to people who have seasons of training and experience. Additional training that can help in terms of making a physician more marketable at that time can be obtained through the Radiology Leader Institute. There's another organization now called the AAPL, which is the American Association of Physician Leadership, formerly known as the ACPE, the American College of Physician Executives. Additional training is available there that can be very helpful for leadership and management type positions. And obviously the true tried-tested MBA or MHA or equivalent always helps as well. Advantages of this type of position is that there's good income, or reliable income, typically, if you're settled well in a position in a network that's established. However, one has to understand that often when you take these kind of roles, you can be sometimes distrusted by the peers, and something you have to accept if you choose to go down this line. Another avenue that's available for physicians who have multiple years of experience, who are thinking about leaving radiology, is pursuing medical legal work. Now, this can be as simple as just brief case reviews and giving second opinions to attorneys or to colleagues, sometimes even in hospital settings where they have internal reviews required for QA issues that are brought up. If you are comfortable and have training or want to get trained, you can go into becoming more aggressive, involving depositions with attorneys, and ultimately represent plaintiff and or defense, and usually both, in terms of trials. If you actually do want to get into this avenue, educating yourself and going potentially to, as some physicians who have become expert witnesses have done, attending some initial legal classes can be a benefit. In addition, there are physicians who have now actually posted websites that actually market the fact that they're available to do these things as necessary. The advantage of this, it can be financially lucrative depending on how much you want to bill per hour. But again, you may end up being unpopular with your enemies, especially if you start doing plaintiff expert witness work. Another option to consider is editing and writing. Now, you could, for example, as is illustrated here, do peer-reviewed writing and write articles in journals like the JACR, where we talk about operations and other issues. It can be editorials, they can be reviewed articles. It is a great way to keep up and actually appraise of literature. It also helps you keep visibility in the scope of radiology and around radiology. You will be approached potentially because of your reputation about additional careers if you're interested. Some people are fortunate enough to go all the way to becoming editors of journals, for example. Over and above that, another option which more and more radiologists are finding interesting, and I bring to your attention, is actually professional writing for freelance. Internet blogs, medical communications, medical magazines. There's actually a survey performed by the American Medical Writers Association in 2011, and the mean income at that time was $119,000 for all writers, not just physicians. Median income is $99,000. There's a good potential chance that if you're a physician and bring added credibility and expertise, that your salary could potentially be higher. And certainly with the inflation, the salary probably is higher than what it was then. So this can be lucrative, especially at that stage of your career. Moving on, the next thing we can look at is careers that are not based on medicine. And the four that we're listed here are the four primary ones that people pursue. We'll talk at length about entrepreneurs in a second. Coaching is becoming more and more of a field that is in demand right now. Having the gray hairs and having the seasoned expertise, if you as a radiologist at that stage of your career are available to coach younger radiologists who have behavioral issues or functional issues or issues dealing with the acclimatization of their new positions. Sometimes it's looked at as an independent outside consultant, as somebody who's non-threatening and able to actually mentor effectively younger radiologists who are trying to cope with that kind of transition in their careers. Teaching is available in academics, sometimes outside of academics, but specifically in academics, it's really hard to find positions typically where you get a huge payment for just teaching. Medical schools do sometimes have allowances, but usually it's coupled with a research expectation, but certainly that's one option. Then there's the encore career, which many of you may have heard of and some of you may not have, which is actually gaining a lot of traction in literature, where physicians find at that stage in their life that their altruism takes over. One of my mentors taught me years ago that your career, your professional career is like a third. Your first third, you basically want to go out and make as much money as you can to recover from all your serious financial debts from school and try and make a living. Your second third is where you actually try and figure out what you want to do with your life, and often transitions happen when you're trying to equilibrate to the position you want. And your last third is when you value society and you want to give back some way to make a difference. Sometimes that last third doesn't have a chance to populate as much as you would have liked to during your clinical career, but you have the opportunity, for example, to do volunteer work or to be able to teach young faculty and things like that, rejuvenate a career with social benefit. Again, salary-wise may not be the best, but something that can be very professionally rewarding. Going back to entrepreneurs, one thing we wanted to emphasize is there is increasing data that physicians are absolutely excellent entrepreneurs. We have usually a pretty high IQ to begin with. Many of us in radiology, because we depend on the fee-for-service model for years, are very, very good in terms of understanding balance sheets and profit margin losses, contribution margins, etc. So when we try and transition to the entrepreneurial roles, we're respected in that respect. There are various venture capitalists which want to partner with us because of our knowledge of upcoming devices, for example, for intervention, upcoming equipment for imaging. And so there's a tremendous opportunity for radiologists who want to become involved in entrepreneurial work. There is actually an organization called the SOPE, which is a Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. This has over 4,000 members now nationally. You can become a consultant for intellectual property, and as well as be involved with startups depending on how aggressive you are, how much of your own resources you want to allocate. Whichever route you choose to go, whether it's pursuing non-clinical or clinical, just as when you make transitions early in their careers, some of the principles stay the same. When you try and move on to a new position, these are the 5 key elements that most people look at when they actually think about a career. What is the actual position involved? Is it really resonating with what I want to do professionally? The location geographically. That's teamwork. Yeah. Teamwork is dreamwork, right? I don't know. Location. You want to sometimes be geographically in the country. That may alter where you decide. Income, lifestyle, and job security. Now understand that realistically, to get all 5 is pretty rare. Something usually has to give. So when you, and as I teach fellows who are going out, residents who are going out, or people who approach me in mid-career who come to me because of my own experiences of what to think about, I always tell them, look at these 5 and decide what's priority. Make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Be rigorous, be disciplined, and then figure out your career. So, you can dream about all you want, about what you want to do. But for example, for this individual who's thinking about getting hair, it may be unrealistic to be able to get all the different types of hairstyles that are available out there. The reality is we have to manage our expectations so that we can confront the reality that we're facing. And in essence, I think the important thing to understand is that there is a finality to this if you choose to move away. And it's hard to come back, and that's one thing you have to live with. So what I recommend people, if you're fortunate enough to be in a practice where you are still practicing and have leverage to make the time to be able to check out different possibilities, in other words, put your foot in the water but still have one foot still back on the sand, try and bridge if you can for at least 6 months to a year to find out what this other career really is like. That gives you an opportunity to be able to tell you internally and in your soul, this is really what you want to do. If you're fortunate and you actually make the decision to make the right risk, you will get rewarded. It may not be financially, but maybe professionally, maybe in terms of happiness, maybe avoiding burnout, as we just heard. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. Happy to answer questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Jay. Again, another an excellent presentation. Again, the paper, several of the papers from the Commissioner are in that monograph, which is located in the back of the room. If you walked in and didn't pick one up, I'm sure you can get it on the way out. The college staff has them for you. The third talk in the series is going to be given about radiologists and the problems of depression. The speaker is Claire Bender, who is a long-term friend of mine. She's practiced at Mayo Clinic for, I guess, too many years that I shouldn't discuss it, being PC. She served as a member of the Board of Governors of Mayo Clinic and was chair of its Personnel Committee for its 1,500 staff members. So she does know a little about human resources and the issues and problems relating to depression. She's another long-term member of the Human Resources Commission, a founding member of this group 6 years ago, and has been an excellent resource for all of us. And she's going to be the incoming Human Resources Chair starting in 2017. Claire. And again, we're going to have questions on all these subjects at the end of all these talks.
Thank you all, and it is an honor and a pleasure to stand before you today. Before I begin, I too need to publicly and personally thank Ed Bluth for his leadership on the HR Commission. He's worked tirelessly, and he has brought a new and current awareness to the issues that are before each and every one of us. Ed's not going away. Ed will always be present in our hearts and our minds, and now in our paintings. We'll look for that website, Ed. But to be a member of this committee was very important for me. I'm sorry I get to do the Debbie Downer type of presentation, but it is truly an important topic. Before I begin, how many of you in the audience have known anyone with clinical depression? Raise your hand. Okay, look around, almost everyone. Next question, how many of you have known a physician with clinical depression? Raise your hand. About the same population. The third and last question, how many of you have known a radiologist with clinical depression? About half of you. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg. Yes, it's a real issue. And I want to thank Jay Harold before I begin, because this is actually, depression is part of the continuum, as you will see, and there will be some duplication in some of the risk factors and preventative measures. But I'd like to define depression for you. I'm not a psychiatrist. I really did not appreciate my training in residency. I did some time in internal medicine. My very first rotation in internal medicine was in psychiatry, closed ward psychiatry, and I had a patient kill themselves while I was on call. And so suicide took an important part of my life. Why I think I continued it in my life is something that happened back, and this is for the younger people in this audience. When I took my oral boards, back when there were real oral boards, they're pretty anxiety-provoking, stressful, and I was a pretty uptight person. We're all type A people. I did not do so very well in my very first specialty area. And when I went to my second area, I had an examiner who detected that nervousness. I was upset. I was distraught. He said, "Claire, settle down. You're going to do fine." He sat me down spent a few extra moments with me and got me back on track, and yes, I passed my boards. 2 years later, I had heard that this individual who had been a very warm, welcoming, supportive, gentle soul who had meant a lot in my life had killed himself at work. And I think therein lies my interest in trying to help people who need help. And so I will begin the journey. I have nothing to disclose, but I do acknowledge the work of the Commission, the support of the Board of Chancellors and the ACR for helping bring this issue to the fore. About 6 weeks ago, I was at my state radiology meeting, and the only topic in the hallway during breaks was burnout and depression. And I think you will be hearing a lot more about trying to help our colleagues with their emotional health and their well-being that we'll hear about later. I'm going to give you a little background, some definitions, talk about signs and symptoms, and again, great overlap with what Jay Harold's presented, the scope of the issue, and I think we already have the scope fairly well defined here, and then an idea of some of the resources that other physician groups have worked very hard to get out there. Now, I must admit, when I went to the literature and to look at, excuse me, I'm kind of recovering from the flu, about radiologists in depression, there was almost nothing in the literature. In fact, when we went to submit our manuscript to the journal, Dr. Hillman said, well, you don't have enough information. And with the support of Ed and the committee, we went back to him and said, but this is a real issue, and it was published. So what a lot of I'm going to show you is what's happening in the physician realm, not specific to radiology, but I do hope that we can narrow it down, just as Jay has talked about burnout in radiologists. It's an awareness goal today, educating you, and then helping you or asking you to provide support to your colleagues, your loved ones, your friends, your peers, your work staff, and others, and sharing with you some options for help. Well, the American Psychiatric Association has published the DSM, which is a Diagnostic Statistics Manual 5, which is only a classification and diagnostic tool for mental disorders. It doesn't provide treatment, but at least helps diagnoses. And there are a variety of disorders under the major depressive areas. I won't name those, you can read those, but common to all, which is really important, the presence of a sad, empty, irritable mood, accompanied, and this is important, by somatic or cognitive changes that significantly affect the individual's capacity to function. If you don't have a well-functioning physician, the patient's safety is at risk. Also in the DSM-5, they describe A, B, and C common diagnostic criteria. And again, many of these are duplicated by what Dr. Harold's presentation was, but they have to be 5 or more of these symptoms present for 2 weeks. And you can get this information online. But think about some of your colleagues or some of your family members or loved ones. Continuous loss of energy, not sleeping well, weight changes, don't want to do anything. You can all read those. And those who might even be thinking about suicide. And I will kind of have to lean over into the suicide prevention realm because these people are sick, are clinically ill. Also in the criteria, symptoms that cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, could be at a party you notice something, occupational at work, or other important areas of functioning. It can happen anywhere. And it's important to note that these episodes are not attributable to the physiological effects of substance or other medical conditions. So again, the role of your clinical information and your clinician care. Now, possible manifestations. Again, how many of you have been chewed out by a colleague or noted that someone is really irritable? How about someone who just keeps coming to work tired, or their erratic behavior at work and you're being called to, hey, can you take a second look at this CT? I just want some additional information. Or inappropriate boundaries with patients. That does occur with staff members or peers. Isolation and withdrawal, and as Jay said, he works in a silent room. Our department is moving to group rooms. It has its positives and negatives, but not seeing anybody for 8 hours a day, and maybe a person on the one bathroom break, you see a patient walking down the hall, that is not a healthy parameter. Increased errors and attention to work duties. You're picking up for your colleague on a rather frequent basis. Other manifestations have been noted are the mood swings, inappropriate dress or change in the hygiene. They just aren't taking care of themselves. Inappropriate comments. Again, that's sleep, and we all know what that need for sleep or diminished need for sleep. I worked with an orthopedic surgeon who was proud of the fact he could operate, do committee work, and write manuscripts on 3 hours a night. He was the most depressed person I ever met. Frequent job changes. Are you hiding something? Are they moving from something to another? Or inconsistency and absenteeism. Do you have a colleague that even though if they're full-time, they like to call in sick or just don't have enough energy on a frequent basis? This is something for the chairs to think about. Now, there are predictors of depression in physicians, and there was an article written in 1998, although old, but think about it. Self-criticism. We're all type A, and we say, oh gosh, I wish I could have done better. I should have done this. You go home, I should have done this. I should have said that. I could have done it better. Making mistakes, more frequent mistakes. You might be noticing it, you might not. Dealing with death. Oh, many of you in this room deal with death each and every day. I do a high-throughput CT rotation in the current role that I'm performing, and each one of them is an oncology patient. I delight in the day when I don't have to give bad news, but the majority of the word is it's progression of disease. And what does that mean to that patient, to their families, and so forth? Talked about sleep deprivation, too much sleep, loneliness. I might see 1 or 2 colleagues a day. That's not very, very good. And some days you have to go knock on the door and say, hey, how are you doing? Excuse me. Difficult relationships with other physicians, patients, and then the 24-hour responsibility that all fills in there. Well, let's talk about the scope of the issue. Yes, there is a lifetime prevalence that has been demonstrated for depression, and this is clinical depression in physicians. 13% in men and 20% in women. And it's a similar rate in physicians. However, as we took the role here, that physician depression is and probably grossly under-recognized and not adequately treated. The suicide rate in physicians compared to the general population is greater. A bit more in men and much more in women. And the 2 greatest causes are medication overdose and gunshot wounds. Under-recognition and under-treatment of physicians with depression has been written about, and it's we're physicians, treat thyself or heal thyself. And it's that proud parameter or that proud environment that we were taught to, our egos get in our way. We attempt to diagnose and treat themselves or turn to alcohol and illicit drugs for help. And believe me, that's even more frequent of a problem. And I know of many of my colleagues throughout my institution who have sought outside or gone around the system to receive special treatment so their name will not be, even with all the HIPAA regulations, so they would not be noticed or recognized as having an emotional health issue. Risks for radiologists. There is a radiology group in Italy who, about the only group that have specifically written about this, and it's about why do we get this way? And my belief, and the first line of that slide is, I believe it's a continuum. And it's a slippery slope. It can go up and down, either way. And as you can see, burnout is right next to depression, and then suicide right behind that. But those of us who perceive that when we have excessive demand on us in relation to what we can have in our control, it sets up an anxious state. And believe me, I think each of us entertain that or experience that each and every day. The suicide risk for physicians in the United States is 400, on the average, 400 physicians commit suicide every year. The life impact to you, to all of us, is if we have an emotional or a mental health issue, and I encourage each and every one of you to go to your specific state licensing boards and see what they say about mental illness, their definitions and how they regulate it. It is a wide span of variance, if you will. The good thing is that in almost the majority of states today, there are the PHPs, Physician Health Programs, which bypass state boards and help our colleagues. And I'm going to spend a moment on a slide on that in just a second. But I will alert you to the fact that the ABR, in their maintenance of certification statements, that their role is to protect the public. So they're also watching out and watching over us. And we don't want to hurt anyone. So there are regulatory and licensure and credentialing effects with emotional health. So what can you do? And Jay Harold has talked about this. Talk to a trusted friend. You've got to have a trusted friend or a colleague. You share with your healthcare provider. Whether an internist, family physician, consider outside providers, that I'll mention the PHPs in a minute. Know your state licensure rules, and familiar yourself with your organization's resources and policies. And I hope each and every one of your groups or organizations have these in place that will help take care of you and your colleagues. The PHPs, as I said, vary by state, but what they are is an outside medical group or another approved assessment and post-treatment monitoring facility. So they're parallel to the state board, and they're usually constructed with groups of physicians and perhaps other healthcare providers. They will perform assessments on you, the individual who might have an issue, and they will follow you up and provide post-treatment monitoring to try to assure your success. And it can be from substance abuse, medical issues, psychiatric issues, behavioral issues. It's a wide span of things, and I encourage you all to go to your individual states and see if they have this. And what we're really talking about is making sure that we take care of everyone in a safe manner. The well-being of physicians, it's a crisis. The AAMC chair Rapley said it affects our communities and our patients. Daryl Kirch from the AAMC, it's stressful for all, and now turning attention to the problem, and that's what your ACR is doing. And the AFSP is the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, a physician group, have now described a culture of silence and how to take care and how to get rid of that silent, if you will, and provide some safety nets. What we're doing, we're talking about here today, personal strategies, team leadership, screening tools that we've heard about, and organizational values. Certainly your leadership has to embrace this need as well. And if any of you are leaders, I hope you can take this back to your board. Sorry, Jay, I found this one x-ray here where I was going to get into that position. But by going to any of these resources, and as you're going to hear later this morning, there are programs, screening toolkits to help the individuals. Various organizations are out there already doing a lot about this, and I'm going to just drop down and say your ACR Commission on Human Resources is taking this as the well-being of the radiologist, radiation oncologist, and medical physicist in hand, and we feel that this is one of our focuses. So in conclusion, I hope I've educated you a little bit. I'm saying there's still barriers and they need to be reduced, and it's all about culture change, it's all about awareness, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire. As you appreciate, this is a significant problem, and as you heard, our ACR will be looking towards and trying to help improve the situation going forward in the future. But one of the things that we can do is to not only celebrate the problems, but talk about the opportunities for improvement. And so therefore, we thought we'd give you a little break in the program, and we thought we would talk a little about finding happiness. And so the next speaker is going to be talking about achieving personal happiness, and that's Sanjeev Katyal. And excuse me, I hope I pronounced it close to appropriate. He's currently the Executive Vice President of Clinical and Strategic Services for the Foundation Radiology Group. He talks about and has been interested in radiology care delivery models. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Carnegie Mellon, and he went to medical school at NYU and completed his internship in radiology residency at University of Pittsburgh. He is a special advisor to Highmark for the Pittsburgh Radiology Society. He's a member of the Pennsylvania Radiology Society and is former president of the Pittsburgh Rankin Society. And he'll be telling us how to achieve some degree of happiness.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, my name is Sanj Katyal, and I'm really honored to be part of this panel and speaking on important topics. I've got nothing to disclose. These are a few of the take-home points that I hope to get across today. Before we get started, I want to play a short video clip. Just bear with me. Hopefully it works.
It was ridiculous.
Yes.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't. Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow? I was on an airplane, and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane, and they go, open up your laptop, you can go on the internet. And it's fast, and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down. And they apologize, the internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, this is bull. Like, how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
And I'm playing.
All right, so what's the problem? I think Louis C.K. summed it up pretty well. Listen, the real issue is this. There are a lot of highly functioning people out there, successful by anyone's standards that are filled with low to moderate levels of anxiety, depression, and just general discontent. They spend their lives getting to the next destination only to feel unfulfilled once they get there. And I was one of those people. And judging by this Medscape study, I bet I'm not alone. I remember 10 years ago or so wondering why I wasn't happier. I had achieved more than anything I could have dreamed of. I was married to my best friend. We have a great relationship. I have 4 healthy kids. I had an interesting job designing workflow for a startup company. Growing up, I had no real adversity. We had a decent amount of money, parents were healthy, alive, lived close by. And I began to really worry, and I remember this very clearly, if I couldn't figure out how to experience more joy and more meaning in my life when things were this good, how was I ever going to handle any real adversity when it would inevitably come? Which, by the way, it has. So I began searching for answers, and I was searching really for answers to a single question. How can I learn not just to function, but also to flourish? So I want to talk a little bit about the word happiness, because I really don't like using it. It's really overused and often really used incorrectly. If I ask you if you want to be happy, the answer is of course, right? If I then ask you, well, what does it mean to be happy? The answer it's a little less obvious. And the problem is that most people think of happiness as an emotional state that changes from day to day, minute by minute, right? Yesterday I was happy when I wasn't on call, or today I'm sad, or I'll be happy when I'm on a vacation. And that's not the type of happiness that Aristotle meant when he made his famous quote. The word that he and other philosophers used was eudaimonia, which is really translated as a state of human flourishing or optimal living over a long period of time. Okay? So I'll use the words well-being, happiness, flourishing interchangeably, but I'm really referring to this state of optimal living. And there's a reason that we should want to be happier. Every action we do is an attempt to increase our well-being, right? We never strive to be happy in order to be rich, but we often strive to be rich in order to be happy. Happy people really experience more success in virtually all domains of life. So clearly the study of what makes us happy or flourish is worthwhile to all of us, no matter what stage of life or career we're in. I think it's important to think and spend some time thinking about what makes us flourish, or what it means for us to flourish. And this will vary from people to people, but what needs to happen in all aspects of our lives in order to make a great life? That's the question to answer. And these are just some of my thoughts. I want to talk briefly about a relatively new field called positive psychology, or what some say the science of happiness. Before World War II, psychology had 3 distinct missions. It was to treat and cure mental illness, it was to improve the lives of everybody, and then on the other extreme, it was to study and nurture genius. Okay? After the war, with the creations of the VA and the National Institutes of Mental Health, there was a lot of money focused on the mental illness component. And unfortunately, that left behind the other 2 large domains of psychology. So for every 1 paper on positivity or flourishing in psychology literature, there were 30 on pathology, disease, mental illness. Okay, so positive psychology is kind of an attempt to balance that out. If you think about traditional psychology, has taken somebody who's functioning at a -8 and moving them to a -1, or if you're lucky, to a 0. Positive psychology takes the person who's functioning pretty well at a +2, +3, and moves them to a +8 or a +9. And we really need both areas of focus. For too long, we've been content to just get by or exist. And as long as someone's not in acute distress, we as society feel like they're okay. But the reality is that there's a ton of unrealized potential in that +2 or +3 person. And this is what positive psychology attempts to unlock using evidence-based science. Okay, let's get back to flourishing and not just functioning. So what if I told you you would get used to all the good things in your life? You would eventually take for granted your new car, your house, your partner's salary, your kids, your spouse, and even your health. You know, some people call this human nature, while others use more scientific terms like hedonic adaptation, which is really defined as adapting to positive and negative stimuli in our lives that are constant. I first learned about hedonic adaptation while studying Stoic philosophy several years ago, and the Stoics thought it was precisely because of this adaptation process that we should be indifferent to anything external to us, conditions, events, as they relate to our happiness, because we get used to them anyway, so in the end they're not really that big of a deal. And this is an amazing critical principle to understand, and it's really, I think, probably more important to teach our kids. You know, when I asked my 16-year-old whether spending his money on MLB PlayStation 17 is worth the price, given that he's got last year's game at home, and he replies, you know, as he always does when he wants something, emphatically, yes, it's going to be awesome. I then ask him a few months later, how was it? And he's like, it's okay, pretty good, I guess. You know, he's adapted, and I think we can all think of similar experiences in our own lives. Now, it's important to know there's an evolutionary advantage to getting used to things that are constant in our lives, right? If those things didn't fade into the background, we wouldn't be able to recognize and perceive new stimuli and potential threats from old ones, okay? So, but you can imagine this is a huge obstacle. If all the good things in our life that are constant just kind of fade into the background, it's really hard to sustain or improve well-being. And nature just wanted us around long enough to procreate, right? Didn't care how happy we were along the way. Several years ago, I came across a book called Happier by Tal Ben-Shahar, and it was my first introduction to a scientific model of happiness. And Tal's claim to fame was he taught the largest class ever at Harvard. It was, I think, 1,400 or 1,500 students on the science of happiness. And I reached out to Tal to tell him, I enjoyed his book and where could I learn more. He invited me to do a year-long intensive certification program with him in positive psychology, which I did. And during that time, he often said this quote, and to be honest, back then it was kind of lost on me. But the key for us to not take the good things in our lives for granted is to really simply learn how to pay attention to them, right? As we think about our own lives, once that new job or new relationship no longer grabs our attention, we've essentially adapted to it, right? On the other hand, anything or anyone that keeps popping into our heads is going to be less prone to be taken for granted. Okay, so we know we need to learn to cultivate attention to the good in our lives. How do we do this? There was a landmark study back in 2003 by Robert Emmons, who's considered the leading researcher in gratitude. And he took students, divided them into 3 groups. One group wrote about daily hassles, the other group wrote about neutral life events, and the third group wrote about things they were thankful for. And Emmons' lab did a bunch of pre- and post measurements on various aspects of well-being and found statistically significant improvements in well-being in the group that cultivated gratitude versus the other 2 groups. And this has been replicated many, many times, and gratitude is a huge area of research in positive psychology. And, as I was studying hedonic adaptation, it occurred to me that gratitude works precisely because it's an effective antidote to the adaptation process, right? It creates a habit for us to pay attention to the good, and it slows down us taking things for granted. So how do we learn to incorporate gratitude into our lives? Probably one of the most effective ways to do it is a gratitude journal. There are many, many versions of this. There are online journals. There are old-fashioned notebooks. I've experimented with all different types, different times of the day, different days of the week. What I do right now is an Evernote app on my iPhone, and 3 or 4 times a week I list 3 to 5 things that either have happened that I'm thankful for or good in my life. And the key is to really kind of vary it and to put some meaning behind it. I've probably been doing this since 2013. And what I can tell you is that now I think about things that are happening during the day that I know I'm going to write about. And so it's kind of a positive feedback that helps me be more mindful of good as it's actually happening. Now, I'm not claiming to be a saint or anything. I still yell at my kids. I still get upset at work. And I think as long as we're actively engaged in life, that's not going to change. But what does change is the periods of feeling down or depressed become less the more grateful you become. And that's certainly been true for me. Okay, so hedonic adaptation, getting used to everything good in your life, is the enemy in our fight to flourish. Okay, the first strategic intervention we have is to cultivate attention to the good with gratitude and a gratitude journal. There's another important intervention that we can do, and that's to spend our money on experiences, not possessions, because experiences are less prone to be taken for granted. There is one caveat, though. The caveat is that you've got to vary the type and timing of the experiences, otherwise they'll be too constant and repetitive and be taken for granted. And I learned this from my wife several years ago. Our kids were little and we relied, probably like many of you, on takeout. And we all love sushi, so it became our kind of go-to meal. And as I'm prone to do, and probably maybe not a surprise to anyone that knows me, I took it to an extreme. So we went from having sushi a couple times a month to having it a couple times a week. And, what happened was we just stopped enjoying it, right? The kids took it for granted. It was really expensive. And, we had all adapted to the sushi night. So, well, what do? Well, we changed the timing of the experience. Actually, my wife did. I still wanted it every couple of times a week. But she forced us to limit sushi to once a month. And, only at a radiology conference can I call that a sacrifice too. But we put it on the calendar. We really looked forward to it. And when we got it, it was great again. So in this case, quantity, too much sushi had affected quality, or too little pleasure. Okay, so I want to move from cultivating attention to the good to cultivating attention to the present moment. And we've touched upon this topic in past lectures. Most of us live with a constant stream of thoughts, worries, and to-do lists just swirling around in our heads. The Buddhists call this the monkey mind. And, we need more peace and more presence. And yet we find ourselves thinking about work while playing with our kids, surfing the web while talking to our spouse, or, checking our phones at the first sign of solitude. And I'm guilty of all of it. It's estimated that we spend less than 20% of our lives actively engaged in what we're doing in each moment. And because we miss most of life as it happens, we then miss it again once it's gone. And this is what I mean by not missing life twice. So fortunately for us, science has some answers. What if I told you there was a pill out there that could reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease and events by nearly 50%, reduce rates of hypertension, anxiety, depression, do all this stuff up here. Additionally, the pill is free. It's got no side effects. It's available to anyone at any time. Anybody? Sleep. Well, sleep's pretty good. That's a good one. But that's not what I had in mind. Anybody? Exercise? That's meditation. Yeah. Can I ask for a show of hands of anybody that regularly meditates? Okay, that's pretty good. Not quite as good as the college classes that I asked the same question, but so yeah, there are over 350 peer-reviewed articles investigating the effects of meditation on stress-related disorders, improved cognition, just overall better quality of life. And I think the most interesting finding for me from the meditation research is this concept of neuroplasticity, where you can actually change the structure of the brain using these techniques over really not that long of a period of time. And this was a kind of an initial study that's been replicated since then out of Harvard. They took 34 patients, divided them into controls, and then a mindfulness-based stress reduction program that included meditation, did pre and post MRs. And what they found was increased gray matter density in the hippocampus in meditator groups compared to the control groups. And hippocampus is thought to be related to attention, learning, memory, regulation of emotions. And the interesting finding in this study is that the participants that reported decreased stress after the program had lower density gray matter in the amygdala, which is negatively correlated with anxiety and stress. Okay. I'm going to go through the next few very quickly. This is decreased cortisol and anxiety with meditation. This is a specific type of meditation, transcendental meditation, which is using a mantra as a focal point. There is Vipassana meditation, which uses the breath, or mindfulness meditation, which uses just body sensations. The key is to have an anchor to keep coming back to with the mind when it wanders, which it always does. This is an impressive group of studies. These are out of journals like Stroke, Hypertension, Circulation, and these findings led the American Heart Association to formally endorse transcendental meditation as an effective therapy in the fight against cardiovascular disease. This is a study looking at experienced meditators versus control groups and showing decreased volume loss in the meditators versus their age-matched controls. They're shown in red. So, in summary, happiness is the ultimate currency for us. It's the aim of all that we do, but really should be thought of as a state of flourishing over a longer period of time. Okay. To avoid our evolutionary wiring of taking all the good for granted, we need to learn how to cultivate attention to the good in our lives. We can do this by a gratitude journal. I think one of the other ways, and I got this from the Stoics as well, they advocated negative visualization, where you mentally subtract something positive in your life and then visualize your life without it. And that's very, very powerful. We want to spend our money on experiences, not possessions, and then we want to vary the type and timing of those experiences. Remember, quantity affects quality. And listen, I know how these lectures work. We listen, we hopefully hear some interesting things, and then we go about our busy lives. If I can urge all of you to do one thing, just one thing, do negative visualization. Take 60 seconds while you're driving home from work and mentally subtract your job, your health, your kids, whatever it is, just vary it up. It is very powerful technique. If you can do two things, start a gratitude journal, and just in the notes section in your iPhone is all it takes. We all have downtime where we have our phones. And then finally, try to meditate. 1 minute a day is all you need. And this is my email. I'd be happy to get some feedback on how any of these techniques work and answer any questions from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully all of you will have gratitude journals and will say you're gracious, you have some gratitude for the session. So we hope you've enjoyed this. The next presentation is going back to the Human Resources Commission, and part of the work that we've done also is to look at what attracts medical students, what positively and negatively attracts medical students to this field of radiology. And one of the people who've worked actively in this area is a member of our Human Resources Commission who came from the Young Physicians and Residents and Fellows group. And Michael Francavilla is now no longer a resident and fellow, but he's a staff member at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And he's going to be talking to us next about what attracts individuals to radiology.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bluth. I've nothing to disclose, but I'd like to start with the end here and summarize the take-home points from this. The most important factors that influence the choice of specialty for senior U.S. medical students who are going into radiology is the intellectual challenge, followed closely by the work environment and impact on patient care. For female students who are choosing to go into radiology, role models were equally important as the intellectual challenge for their choice. For students who chose not to go into radiology, the degree of patient contact was by far and away the number one factor in influencing their decision. But this was trailed by the work environment and the impact on patient care. Misconceptions about radiology persist, and it's incumbent on us to address these with medical students. And most schools do not require dedicated imaging rotations, even though we found that students with required rotations trended towards choosing radiology more often. So most of the data from this talk comes from a survey that the ACR Commission on Human Resources did in conjunction with a few members from ANSWER. And the reason we started looking into this was back in 2015, the number of unmatched radiology positions reached its peak. Since then, it's happily returned to approximate its 2008 levels. But if we want to continue to attract the highest quality, highest caliber students that we can, we need to understand what drives students to choose or to not choose radiology. So what do we know about why medical students choose their specialty? Well, we know some things, and some of them we can't change. For instance, medical students are increasingly choosing specialties that have a perceived controllable lifestyle. Medical students considering primary care may end up choosing radiology in the end due to that higher salary. And we also know that personality traits have a large influence. Students with certain personality traits may be more likely to enter technique-oriented specialties, of which radiology is one. We also know some things that we can influence. For instance, exposing first-year medical students to radiology has a positive, long-lasting impact on the impression of radiology as a specialty, and also increases their interest in radiology as a career in the long term. And we know that the vast majority of students from institutions where radiology is a required rotation also think that radiology should be a required rotation. But what we don't know is specifically what drives students to choose radiology or not choose radiology. So to figure that out, we decided to survey fourth-year medical students to find out the factors that they report influence their choice of specialty, and also ask them about their perceptions of diagnostic radiology. So we sent out a survey monkey to all the deans of all 141 medical schools and asked them to distribute them amongst their students. We received 1,219 responses, which approximates about 7% of the population of U.S. medical students. 51% of the responses were male, 49 were female, and the ethnic demographics roughly approximate the medical student population. Similarly, the anticipated future specialties were similar to what we see overall, with 39%, the majority planning to enter medicine or primary care, and only 7% choosing to enter radiology. On this is a table of the factors that influence their choice of specialty, radiology versus any other specialty. And what we're showing here are weighted averages, where larger numbers are more important. And I've bolded the numbers that are most important in each category. So for respondents applying into radiology, the most important factor was intellectual challenge, followed closely by the work environment and patient care. Whereas for students applying into any other specialty, the most important factor was the degree of patient contact at 3.2, and this was trailed by the work environment and impact on patient care at 2.4 and 1.9 respectively. A minority of students undertook dedicated imaging training, but of those who did, 19% of them said that it turned them toward radiology. 72% said it had no effect either way. The majority of students still don't take dedicated imaging courses, but of those students, a majority of them elect to take radiology. The most common reason for doing so is because they wish to learn about imaging for their non-radiology specialties. We found that students with dedicated required imaging rotations tended to be more likely to choose radiology. It wasn't a significant difference, but it was definitely a strong trend. Unsurprisingly, we found that students who eventually chose radiology undertook dedicated imaging training. Only one respondent did not. we found that ethnicity was significantly associated with the choice of radiology as a specialty. Asians were significantly more likely to select radiology than all other races combined. However, Caucasians were not more likely to choose radiology than all other non-Asian races. So to assess some perceptions about common stereotypes in radiology, we presented 9 statements to the students to agree with or disagree with. For instance, we asked if radiologists had patient contact. So we found that radiology applicants were more likely to agree that radiologists have patient contact. They were also more likely to strongly agree that radiologists play a vital role in diagnosis and patient management, and also that new techniques and technologies are frequently being developed in the field of radiology. However, radiology applicants were less likely to agree with the statement that radiologists have a controllable lifestyle. And luckily, they were less likely to agree that radiology is monotonous. Non-radiology applicants were more likely to agree that in the future, most radiology studies will be interpreted from off-site locations, and also that the radiology job market is shrinking. There was no difference in the disagreement that radiologists were exposed to a significant degree of radiation over the course of their careers, or that radiologist compensation is greater than many other physician specialties. Women were much less likely than men to choose radiology as their specialty. In our sample survey, 12% of the men plan to enter radiology, but only 3% of women plan to enter radiology. So females are significantly less likely to choose radiology, even though they make up more than 50% of med school classes these days. And this is reflected in the fact that only 21% of practicing radiologists are females. Luckily, fortunately, we've seen this trend change with time. So as you can see on this graph that comes from the annual workforce survey, and as a reminder, fill out your annual workforce surveys if you get them. You can see that as physicians get younger, they make up a larger females make up a larger percentage of practicing physicians, but this rate has stagnated over the past 2 decades. It seems... Okay, there we go. So, to investigate this further, we did a subgroup analysis to look at the factors influencing men versus women who are going into radiology. And again, I'm showing the weighted averages, and larger numbers are better, and I've bolded the top 3 in each category. And you can see that role models for women were equally as important as the intellectual challenge for their decision to go into radiology, whereas for men it was the same as overall. Subsequent research published this year confirms that intellectual stimulation is very important for women, but that research found that role models were less important for women, and I'll go over that briefly. Some confounding factors are that women are less likely to receive encouragement toward subspecialties, and they're also less likely to have mentors in specialist specialties. And this is compounded by the fact that the overall shortage of women in radiology may make it difficult for female students to see themselves in the profession. So in the study that was published earlier this year that looked specifically at why women choose radiology, the largest, most important factor was intellectual stimulation. And mentorship was much less important. Only 43% of respondents reported that it was important. So to review, the most important factor for students going into radiology is intellectual challenge. And the most important factor for those not going into radiology was the degree of patient contact. However, there are 2 factors that both groups have in common. And one may wonder why that is. clearly there's some difference in perception here, and the natural tendencies of different students may factor into this. But additionally, there are definitely some wrong ideas and misconceptions that can be addressed with these students. So some of the wrong ideas include the fact that or idea that radiologists lack patient contact, that is monotonous, that will be interpreted from off-site in the future, or that the job market is shrinking. And the students who are not going to radiology agree, but not as strongly as they ought to, that radiologists play a vital role in diagnosis and patient management, that new technologies and techniques are coming out of radiology, and that radiologists have a controllable lifestyle. So knowing this, then we can develop an action plan. This would include, first and foremost, including dedicated imaging rotations for third and fourth year medical students, and emphasizing the intellectual challenge, the positive work environment, and the huge impact on patient care that radiology has. Some specific ways that we can do this would include making the learning process more active for students by having, for example, preview studies. We should highlight the generally positive team player atmosphere. We should also consider bringing students to tumor boards so they can see firsthand the impact that imaging has on patient management. And when we are reviewing studies with them, we should ask questions not only about the interpretation, but I think we should focus more on how the imaging study is going to impact management directly. We also need to address misconceptions. As Dr. Gondrin wrote, every misconception represents an educational opportunity. And one thing that we can address is patient contact. One way we can do that is by routinely exposing rotating medical students to IR, breast imaging, and for those departments that do treatment, nuclear medicine often has patient contact. We definitely need to embrace Imaging 3.0 principles and practices. Some ways that we can do that are rounding with clinical teams or developing consultation services with clinical contact. And for many of us, we discuss imaging results with patients, especially on breast, fluoro, and ultrasound rotations, although that varies by department. Try bringing a medical student in with you. And last, we can address the monotony by illustrating the wide variety of cases and experiences that we all see every day. We should also address the misconception that in the future most radiology studies will be interpreted from off-site. In fact, on-site radiologists are highly unlikely to be replaced by foreign radiologists. As you know, we see a lot of insourcing now rather than outsourcing. And last, the radiology job market is not shrinking. As Dr. Bluth mentioned earlier, job opportunities for radiologists have increased since 2013. We should also avoid any low-yield interventions. So the students reported that recruitment events were not important for them, so we should dedicate less of our time to those. We should consider replacing online curricula with live lectures, especially in the preclinical years when it may be most impactful. We should de-emphasize radiology interest groups as they currently are. Some groups have considered revitalizing them and changing them so that they're more effective. And we should be selective about students' involvement with professional groups. So just to review, the most important factors influencing the choice of specialty for radiology applicants are the intellectual challenge. For females, it's the role models. For those not going into radiology, it's the degree of patient contact. And for both, work environment and impact on patient care. And remember that misconceptions about radiology persist, and it's our job to address these with medical students. And last, most medical schools don't require dedicated imaging rotations, but we found that students with required rotations trended towards choosing radiology more often. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just also to mention, one of the other statistics that we learned about was that, as Michael said, that around 12% of individuals, 12% of people who were involved in a radiology personal contact in terms of a direct elective ultimately chose radiology. But for those people, even for a small amount of personal contact, even if it wasn't a radiology-directed elective, if it was just a small course, it could have been a one-week course or even part of another course in which you provide some radiology content, they would be attracted as well. If they had no contact, if they had no organized contact in radiology, the likelihood of going into radiology was 0.001%. So if you had some content, it was likely to be around 12% of those people across the board who would choose radiology. So again, if you go back to your institutions, if you're at all interested in this, that's at least some contact is better than no contact, even if you're not running it to show, even if the contact is another department. If you do some of the things that Michael talked about in terms of offering shadowing you to a tumor board where you show your intellectual interest and you show the depth of information that you provide, that's the kind of thing that attracts people. So there's all sorts of ways to do it. Okay, so the final presentation for the session, and then we're going to go into an open opportunity for questions, is by Dr. Halley Parikh, and it's going to be about creating a curriculum of health and wellness for radiologists. She is completed a primary surgical intern year at the University of California and is currently a resident in radiology at the Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson program in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And she's going to be talking about creating a curriculum of health and wellness for radiologists.
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Bluth. Again, my name is Halley Parikh. I'm one of the first-year radiology residents from Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Today, I'm happy to present my abstract, Creating a Curriculum of Health and Wellness for Radiologists. I would like to first recognize my collaborators, Dr. Donna Eckstein, a third-year radiology resident who's busy studying for the boards right now, and Dr. Stephanie Hanhan, our attending radiologist who's been an avid supporter of this project from the beginning. I have no financial disclosures. So, as we all know, literature has shown that radiologists perform less physical activity at work when compared to other medical specialties, placing us at an increased risk of sedentary behavior. This is a particular issue when we find ourselves performing diagnostic work for many number of uninterrupted hours while sitting down. And this is becoming even more apparent for three reasons. Increased volume of cases, pressure for fast reporting, and emphasis on RVUs. Sedentary lifestyles have been known to be linked with increased risk of cardiac and metabolic health, such as diabetes and myocardial infarction. In addition, sedentary behavior is also positively linked with impacting our psychological health, as well as our perception of quality of life, which may in turn cause increased risk of burnout and fatigue, as well as decreased concentration. This is reflected in in the most recent Medscape's Physician's Lifestyle Report, which was quoted earlier during this session, where it notes that radiologists, as a field, is within top 10 specialties at risk for burnout, and seventh place to be exact, which is a significant increase from the prior report where we placed number 18. Another finding that I thought was particularly troublesome and shocking is that in most recent research suggests that the risks that's associated with sedentary behavior at workplace, they're not decreased by our efforts outside of workplace. So in other words, we can no longer think that we're safe by going out to work out for an hour after our work if we remain sedentary throughout the workday during the day. The research shows that the risks that come with sedentary lifestyle at work they're not abated by our efforts outside of work. On the other hand, physical activity, both at work as well as outside of work, they have been shown to be linked with decrease in stress levels and boost our self-perception of well-being, encourage social interaction with other physicians, and therefore increase productivity while improving quality of learning. Therefore, we were determined to develop and implement a health and wellness curriculum aimed at educating our radiologists to adopt and continue healthy behavior at work in order to improve quality of life. We began our project by sending out an anonymized survey to all of our attending radiologists and residents to evaluate their amount and type of physical activity both at and outside work, as well as motivating and deterring factors during the workday. Following the survey, we created a 9-week curriculum in a weekly email format, each containing information about a specific topic that's relevant to radiologists' everyday life. We also held a separate journal club for our residents, discussing 2 different scientific papers on how to decrease repetitive stress injuries, as well as tips and advice in terms of how to increase physical activity during the workday. The goal behind this initiative was, with this journal club, was to try to promote healthy behavior at work earlier during our career. Following the completion of the curriculum, we sent out a post-curriculum survey to evaluate the effectiveness of our curriculum. We had about 55% pre-curriculum responses, and as this pie chart suggests, about 4% of the respondents felt active to very active during the workday, and about a quarter, so 24%, felt neutral about their physical activity at workplace. However, about 3/4 of the respondents felt that they felt sedentary to very sedentary at workplace during the day. When asked about the main deterrent for their physical activity during the workday, many of them stated that responsibility for work as well as lack of time are the main reasons why they felt not physically active at work. This is not a surprise, where we've all been there sitting down to read cases at 8 a.m. and the next thing you know, it's time to go home. It's 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. 50% of the respondents also noted that even though they try to stay active in their free time at work, outside of work, or being sedentary at work, has a negative impact on their mental health. This corresponds strongly to the research finding that I noted before. Simply by staying active outside of work is not enough to counteract the negative effects that come with being sedentary at workplace. This is an overview of different topics that were discussed during the curriculum, extending from ergonomics to stretching exercises, proper posture at the desk. While creating this curriculum, we felt that the awareness is the #1 step to making changes, so we made sure to cover a variety of topics. We also focused our efforts on making the curriculum as visually as possible, since we felt that most radiologists are visual learners. Essentially, our goal was to provide information with tips and ideas that were realistic and easy to implement. This is an example of a weekly snippet in which we discuss many different types of apps, smartphone apps for health and wellness purposes. Since we all have smartphones and use many apps frequently throughout the day, we felt that this is helpful and very beneficial in providing information regarding our own healthy habits and activity levels, and determine what are the motivating factors behind changing our behavior. We also made sure to include a wide variety of different apps because many people have different personal goals and they know what works for them versus not. Examples, this shows an example of a picture that was included with Desk Posture Week, which highlights the important aspects of positioning in order to avoid injury from sitting in an incorrect position for a long time. We felt, again, we tried our best to include a lot of pictures in our curriculum so that it's easy to grasp and try to make changes, and which is essentially what our goal was. Following the curriculum, completion of the curriculum, we sent out a post-curriculum survey to which we had 45% response rate. Overwhelmingly, the respondents stated that the curriculum was helpful to extremely helpful. 78% stated that the curriculum inspired them to make changes at workplace and try to stay physically active. The curriculum also reminded them to to incorporate healthy behavior into their workday and also continue to stay physically active both at work as well as outside work, and they felt that they learned new ways to do so. The majority stated that they would like to see the curriculum continue in the future. When asked about curriculum subjects to be found to be most helpful, the respondents reported that desk stretches were the most helpful topic, closely followed by desk posture and then ergonomics. Alternatives to sitting as well as eye exercises were also popular topics. We felt that the topics that were more popular tended to be the ones that had the most visual pictures, and we felt that the ones that are less popular were the topics that people already knew about. In conclusion, despite our awareness of the risks of sedentary behavior, many find it difficult to incorporate physical activity into their day due to our perception of lack of time. This is more apparent now with increased volume of cases, pressure for fast reporting, and emphasis on RVUs. Mitigating this propensity for sedentary behavior at workplace for radiologists is extremely important in reducing risks of our own health and improving quality of life. Implementing healthy habits earlier on during residency training may be beneficial in the long run as well. The creation of curriculum focused on providing strategies and information about our own healthy and unhealthy habits was found to be effective in making our radiologists feel more aware of their behaviors and motivating them to make changes in the workplace, including increasing physical activity. Additionally, we found that the curriculum resulted in an overall improved quality of life at workplace for our radiologists. It is our intention to continue this project in the future, since we feel that this topic of health and wellness will always be important in our careers. Our post-survey included a section for asking for feedback in regards to ideas for the future curriculum. Responses stated that re-emphasizing the same topics with more pictures or little clips of videos might be helpful, as well as adding new topics such as ambient lighting or temperature in the reading room is also another idea that we received. Many respondents also requested updates on quarterly newsletters to make sure that we keep up with the current best practices to maintain health behavior. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite all the faculty now up to the podium, including you. So everyone wanted to come up, and we'll be open for questions. While everyone is coming up, I just want to recommend that one of the future papers that the HR Commission will be publishing is one about recommendations regarding the workstations and the interpretation. And so we're going to be coming up with recommendations for what what best practices potentially can be in that arena. So, people who have questions, I'd like to ask, yes, why don't you state who you are? Well, why don't you just ask a question and who you'd like to answer?
Hi, my name is Brian Bluth. I'm from North Carolina. And I feel like some of the issues with burnout right now are related to the fact that we're sort of at the terminus of this fee-for-service model where the reimbursement just keeps getting ratcheted and we try to compensate, go faster. And that's a very negative thing for physicians. If we do go to a system that pays based on quality value, do you think that panel members feel like that may address some of the issues of burnout and some of the other issues that we talked about today, physicians and radiologists specifically?
Jay, why don't you start?
That is a very interesting and tough question. I think if the work is interesting, and moving to value, that is thinking about different ways to add value rather than just grinding out cases at a rapid speed, and if it involves interacting more with people, I think that might be helpful. Regardless of what happens, I think we just have to be careful of sort of assessing what's going on in our groups, and if whatever is happening is such that large numbers of people are feeling burnt out, we need to think about different strategies, including hiring more people and earning less money. And the interesting thing in our group is we're paying, in effect, by enticing people to take some of the shifts with more time off, that it's actually decreasing money to the group as a whole. In other words, if, let's say, for one night call shift, if you get 2 weeks off thereafter, in effect you're paying more for that person's shift, and therefore it tends to decrease the income of the group. I think we have to be knowledgeable that we are making, in general, quite a bit of money as radiologists. We may have to settle for less money. But the question you bring is very interesting, and no one is fully sure how the value proposition is going to come down and what radiologist control is really going to have in that value proposition. But I'm hopeful it'll be for the better for our patients and for ourselves.
Claire, comments?
Well, I too am intrigued, and it's a very provocative question, and I think it's something that maybe the Commission can start to measure, or at least have a tool to help the practices begin to monitor this. There are many other variables involved, but I think we're all experiencing what you are, and so we'll take a note in regard to that. But thank you, and maybe you could write me a note, and we could have a further discussion on that. I think it's part of the environment too. It's in my practice. Almost every new hire, the staff are asking for, that balance, and every individual has to find a balance, but everyone is being hired as a reduced FTE, reduced in 1.0 FTE, and that's their choice. I think this generation, this millennial generation, is doing that. So I think we're on a crash course, and I think we have to take this to our leadership, and we as individuals are feeling it, and maybe our groups or divisions are, but what is our department chair, or what do our department chairs think, and what can organizational leadership mean as well? In my organization, it has the attention of the CEO. Don't have answers yet, but that's what we have to come up with, and maybe it's having stronger data will be helpful.
One of the components also that we're doing from the Human Resources Commission, and we brought it up actually to the leadership of the whole ACR, is our concept that we believe that we need to redesign the practice of radiology rather than redesigning individual radiologists. So although some of the things we talked about achieving happiness and journals and yoga and so forth can help us as individuals, these symptoms are coming from the way we work and the way our radiology departments have become redesigned to be efficient, to be PACS-oriented, to have no free time, to not be able to get up, to not to interface with people. We have to redesign the way we practice for us to be happy. And I think we need to embrace the fact that we need a significant change. I think that attitude has been brought up to the ACR leadership. We're evaluating that, and hopefully more to come on that in the future. Another question?
Yep, Michael from Boston. Thank you all for the presentation. You guys are the Human Resources Commission, and there's been a lot of recent literature in the business world about the importance of sort of chief human resources officers, realizing that in medicine we really don't have people like that all the time, at least in individual departments. It's not sort of a financially operated part of our department necessarily. People don't think so. How can we either hire people like that or ask somebody with that role to sort of create job descriptions and expectations so that everyone who's hired for a new job is not set up to fail from the get-go? Realistic expectations and addressing things.
Good question. Let me just start off with that. As a former chair, I can tell you one of the job descriptions of the head of the group is to try to work with all members as they join the group and to develop an appropriate culture and appropriate environment to make people happy and satisfied. The problem is chairs themselves are overworked, overstressed, and similarly have the same issues regarding burnout that others do. So I think it's a good point. But what an example, there are organizations that actually do have that. As I pointed out earlier, Claire Bender at Mayo Clinic was on the board, and her role on the board, her portfolio, was human resources. So maybe, Claire, you could talk a little about that as well.
Yes, it's a really good question, and it's all about resources, but human resources are when you talk about the payroll, about 70% of the payroll, so let's invest in our people. Just an anecdote in the 10-year experience that I had working with a large variety of department chairs. And we would ask them what is their greatest need and what takes up the greatest percentage of their time. And they would uniformly answer 80% of their time was human resource or management of their personnel. Pardon me. So what we did is we had a variety of strategies to help people. We had the institutional personnel committee that helped the leadership with their issues, but various departments, and this was by a department chair decision, formed their own personnel committees. So there was a physician leader, and my culture was about physician leadership teamed with administrators. So I was teamed with a senior administrator with HR background training. And similar departments did that as well to take care of the individual issues. So they were in charge of staff development from day one, faculty development, academic appointment and promotion, health issues, and the whole spectrum of HR. And so it's the awareness of the organization. I've talked to a few people here, and I actually talked to Jim Brink about the issue the other day. I said, Jim, you have one of the largest departments in the nation, and he has a ton of HR issues. Every department has HR issues. And I said, you should form a personnel committee and give a physician a little extra training, give him an administrator with HR skills to help solve these issues. And it would probably help, it's about connectedness, networking, having resources, someone to go to for help. That's the problem. People, when they have these issues, they don't know where to go, they don't know how to get help, and then it tumbles. So that would be my recommendation. The awareness, and that's what we're trying to do here is say, this, physician health, radiologist health is an issue, and we have to try to help fix it. So hopefully that answers your question.
I just have a brief comment, and then I heard something recently, and one of the jobs of a department chair, basically, is to know what the desires and skills of the individuals in the department are, and try to align them as best as possible with the needs of the department. In other words, one person may have a desire to teach or do research. Another person may want to take on a leadership role. Another person doesn't want any of that. They just want to sit and grind out cases. People may want to develop protocols and so on and so forth. People have different needs, so it's important for the people making the decisions and the assignment of roles. And this actually starts before, it starts even in the interviewing process before someone is hired, but also during the hiring process to make sure that everything is aligned the best you can given the constraints that we all have.
Yes, another question?
Well, my question is actually more just kind of to bug in the ear of the commission, is as you move forward on these issues of burnout and responses to burnout, to try to remember and maybe have contact with the bit by the commission, the ACR, that deals with small groups, emergency radiology. I had the experience, I was in the small group practice, private practice for 13 years, and then I switched to academic practice now. And people ask me, well, what do I find is the big difference? Or what's the best thing about being in academic practice? And my answer is, I can get sick. It doesn't make everything disrupt. I'm not coming back from my family vacation because my partner has appendicitis. So there are specific problems for small groups that definitely come down to you just don't have enough people to go around, but what are other ways the college or anybody else can help out with making things more resilient for small groups?
So thank you. That's a very good comment. But one of the things we try to do in the college, and certainly we try to do in the Human Resources Commission, is that we have a wide spectrum of people who are on the Human Resources Commission, including we have a liaison to the Small and Rural Practices Group. So we have one of their members of their commission part of our commission, so we can actually talk about those problems. Which reminds me, for any of you who are here, if any of you are interested in participating and volunteering in our activities, certainly if you give us a card and let us know about your interest, that's something we certainly would like to help and participate. Yes, another question?
Steve Chan, New York, New Jersey. This is a question which touches on the subject that Dr. Parikh mentioned, but obviously would impact all the other subjects as well, which is the idea of encore careers as well as ongoing other careers while you're pursuing a career in radiology. Peter Drucker said, start your second career before you're 50 years old. And I was wondering what you thought about the idea of people actually developing niches in their career that is actually outside, perhaps allied to radiology, but is outside radiology while you're doing it in your career. Obviously easier for some academics than if you're a very busy private practice, not that academics are busy, but at least academics get the opportunity to pursue other fields. So I was wondering what you thought.
Jay, why don't you start?
So several physicians are doing that, both in academics and in private practices. Sometimes actually, having been in the more community practice model and in academics, sometimes, believe it or not, there's less restrictions to do that in the private practice models, because sometimes in the academic institutions, there's a lot of conflict of interest regulations and so forth that make it a little more difficult to do that, depending on what you're looking at. For example, if you're looking at intellectual property at a product that would potentially compete with the institution, sometimes that's not always looked upon favorably. I think, you and anybody else who's interested in potentially doing a parallel career as a bridging opportunity before transitioning is always a good idea, so that you can get a taste of what it's like first. The analogy is of 1 foot in the sand, 1 foot in the water first. See what it's like, and if it's something that gives you positive energy, something that suits your soul, and it's something that you're going to understand moving forward what the long-term risks and benefits of that profession are, and it's a positive step potentially for you. Most people who make a transition, literature has shown, do better with the transition than when they start. And that's something that should be.
And certainly one way to approach it, 75% of radiology groups have individuals who work part-time. And the corollary to that is 16% of radiologists are working part-time. If you are considering a career alternative, probably a wise choice would be perhaps reduce your amount of time, try the alternative. If you're really looking for a change, make sure you enjoy it and make sure you're getting that degree of satisfaction. And probably, importantly, make sure you're actually good at it rather than hope that you will be. So that's an opportunity to try as well. We found out, you can go both ways. We know that around 1.5% of radiologists in 2016 moved from being full-time radiologists to part-time radiologists, and we know that 0.001% went from being part-time to full-time. So it seems like once you see the other side of the picture, you prefer to be part-time. But in any case, you can go both ways while you're employed. So that's a good way to trial it, I think, is to reduce your time, try the other opportunity, and then see if that's something attractive for you. Claire, yes?
Well, I'd just say another benefit for those, as Jay described your career in thirds, it can be when you're thinking about in that last third, or almost to that last third, your pre-retirement thinking, because retirement can be really scary, or thinking about retirement can be scary, and thinking about a different degree or an additional degree, developing those skills during that time can be very stimulating. And I hope that the Commission will think about succession planning and further retirement issues. In my eyes, it's always best to go to something and not try to drop off a cliff when you retire. And so I totally agree. It can be extremely insightful. I got my MPH degree when I was age 55, and I did it because I wanted to think about doing something else. And I started with a statistics class. I challenged myself and said, can I do this? And, statistics was not a formal science way back when I went to school. And by gosh, I passed, and I said, I'm going to go the full way. And so it made a difference in my entire professional life.
In the remaining 5 minutes, because I know I want to respect everyone's ability to get lunch and to maybe move around and have a little activity, but I would ask if there are subjects that people think would be appropriate, that they would like to see the HR Commission address. So if you have any thoughts about a subject you'd like to see the HR Commission address, I would ask you if you come up to the microphone. In 30 seconds or less, say what that topic is, and we can then take notes of that for future deliberations. Thank you.
I'm Applewhite from St. Louis. I'd like to see more emphasis on mental health issues and remediation for physicians, because there's still a terrific stigma, and actually a lot of the hospital boards, state boards have gotten wise to the physician sales program and put that as a centralized staff renewal and so forth. And I really think there's a terrific unmet need out there, and we need to have well-designed strategies to help people who need help instead of having to fall.
Good, thank you very much. Yes?
Yeah, just Marty, just to build on that, I think Claire touched on it briefly, is the opioid crisis. It's affecting us all, across all socioeconomic boundaries, racial boundaries. And I learned a week or two ago that a very close friend of mine has lost her license. It's going to be a big problem for everyone.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
That's excellent.
Thank you.
So Brian Moore. So I'm a fellow about to finish that part of my training. I guess I don't actually know if it exists, but research into use towards residency training and their role inside of radiology practice, and I guess how that relates, the perspectives of burning out a resident early in their career, and how that relates to their continued success in building the practice later in the field. That's something I kind of have struggled with recently. Thankfully, it's not impeded me or affected me in a negative way. But I haven't actually done this any research on it.
There is some research of burnout involving residents, but not to my knowledge specifically in radiology.
Not in radiology that I'm
But
aware of.
There is some research, and I think it's an excellent.
Good. Thank you very much.
That's
Great.
very helpful.
Along with the previously mentioned suggestion, sorry, my name is Kimberly Windsor, I'm a radiology resident in Arizona. We unfortunately recently suffered the loss of a resident to suicide. And so I was wondering if this is kind of a question and a suggestion, what we can do better as a program, how we can better support our residents and foster an environment of camaraderie and, really lifting each other up and promoting wellness. And additionally, I would be interested if there's any way to get involved with the HR committee and as a resident and help with that. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you please speak with me later? I would, probably the immediate, since this is a very current and urgent need, I would ask you to go to the website, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and there's a lot of tools there, and there may be someone in Arizona or within the Southwest region that can come and help. I think you and your program need some immediate attention. So thank you, and we're very sorry. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing. It's very
Yes.
Hi, my name is Frank Thornton, and I work with UW Health, community radiology practice. And so we're a community practice, so we're essentially a hybrid between our colleagues in the academic division and a private practice. And one of the things that I find most stressful for our group, that leads to a lot of anxiety, is the benchmarks that we're measured against. They don't take into account, I think, benchmarks they're not practices. There's a huge range of practices. I think it's very difficult to get a benchmark that takes into account all of the variability in specific instances, like lots of travel. Having a 24/7 call makes you less efficient because you have more variables. And that's one of the things I think that causes a lot of stress is, having a benchmark that's not ideal to measure the productivity of the community. The second thing.
So just I understand what you're talking about, the RVU productivity of a community-based radiologist in an academic model.
The RVU benchmarks, they're not ideal.
No, not to begin with.
Yet you're held to that standard, even though it's not a good standard.
So is the expectation then that you're supposed to be able to have productivity similar to other community-based radiologists?
Or whatever the benchmark that's chosen. It could be a private practice benchmark, which is going to be much more, it's going to be a much busier practice, and yet we're expected to reach that benchmark. And hiring is based off of that.
The broader issue is even going to be, as we move from an RVU-based reimbursement to a value-based reimbursement, it is what is going to be the measure of your productivity. It's no longer going to move and be an RVU dollar number or an RVU number period, because we're going to be dealing with a different thing. So the question is, how will any of us be evaluated in terms of even more important. So thank you. A good thought to consider. Yes? And this will be the last one. Yeah.
University of Miami, dovetail on that same point. That I think that a lot of source of stress and anxiety in the workplace revolves around things that are out of our control, turnaround times, the volume of cases that we can get through in a day, especially in an academic center with competing interests from tumor boards and other conferences and things that are pulling radiologists away from their workstations. That would be beneficial to have measures that revolve around connectivity or these other value-added services. I know that some of these are being developed in other areas, but maybe in the human resources front, to have measures of connectivity or measures of flourishing or these other kind of things that were very nicely presented today, to be able to unmask those and promote those.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank all the faculty for their hard work in preparation for this session. I think the fact that we had over 100 individuals come to our session about human resources in a very busy meeting indicates there is a lot of interest in human resources. We're glad to see that. I want to remind everyone, we have a staff member who's in the back, the pretty young lady in the striped dress, who has copies of the monograph. If you haven't received it, if you walked in late, if you want to get a copy, she has one for you if you'd like one. And thank you again for your attention, and thank you for participating.